The dust in eastern Mosul hung thick enough to taste, coating Second Lieutenant Marcus Webb's throat as he keyed his radio. Raptor 6, this is Raptor 1-6, moving through Checkpoint Charlie now. Streets clear, heading north. He grinned at his squad leaders, dropping his voice but keeping the radio live. Someone tell Auntie PowerPoint back at the JOC that we haven't seen a damn thing. Maybe she can update her slides. Laughter crackled across the net. Webb felt good, felt invincible in that particular way 24-year-old platoon leaders do when they've been in country for 3 months without taking serious contact. His 30 soldiers moved in a practiced wedge through the shattered urban corridor, past burned-out cars and buildings with their guts blown out. Routine presence patrol. Show the flag. Let ISIS know this neighborhood belonged to the coalition now. The first shot came from a window they'd already cleared. Webb's radio operator went down hard, and suddenly the street erupted. Muzzle flashes sparked from 3 different rooftops, rounds snapping past with that distinctive crack that meant they were close, too close. The platoon scattered for cover behind a low wall, behind rubble, anywhere. The radio net exploded with panicked voices, overlapping calls for contact, for medevac, for someone to tell them where the hell the fire was coming from. Where's our air? Webb shouted into his handset, pressing himself against a bullet-pocked wall. Where's our fucking overwatch? Intel said this was clear. His voice pitched higher than he wanted. This is 1-6, troops in contact, multiple enemy positions. We need. Then something strange happened. One of the shooters on the northern rooftop simply stopped firing. Through the dust and chaos, Webb saw the figure slump forward. 3 seconds later, another shooter on the eastern building dropped, his weapon clattering down into the street. Webb's soldiers kept firing, kept moving, but their enemy was dying from an angle they couldn't even identify. No helicopter overhead, no sound of jets, just the steady, methodical crack of a single rifle from somewhere in the urban maze, each shot deliberate and final. Another insurgent down. Another firing position went silent. Who the hell is that? His squad leader gasped, changing magazines. QRF? Did they send a sniper team? Webb didn't know. He just knew that whoever it was, they were cutting the ambush apart piece by piece, giving his platoon the seconds they needed to bound back, to drag their wounded, to survive. The covering fire was surgical, professional, and utterly impersonal. As the platoon finally broke contact and scrambled toward their extraction point, Webb never saw the quiet figure on a rooftop 800 meters away, breathing slowly, adjusting a scope with hands that hadn't shaken in 20 years. 12 hours earlier, Claire Red Halpern had sat in the Joint Operations Center in her usual corner, half hidden behind 3 computer monitors and a wall map covered in dry erase annotations. She wore cargo pants and a faded polo shirt with a contractor ID clipped to her belt. Her thermos, dented and scratched from a dozen deployments, sat within easy reach. At 46, with gray threading through her tied-back hair, she looked exactly like what the young troops assumed she was, another aging desk warrior who'd never left the wire. The platoon had shuffled into the briefing room that morning with the restless energy of soldiers who believed they already knew everything important. Lieutenant Webb sprawled in his chair, nodding along as Claire quietly outlined the patrol route, her voice steady and unremarkable. These 3 intersections, she said, tapping the map with her dry erase marker, have been used for ambushes in 4 separate incidents over the last 18 months. The enemy likes this geometry. They can get overlapping fields of fire from these buildings here and here. She drew quick angles. If you have to go through this area, I'd recommend adjusting your route too. Ma'am, with respect, Webb interrupted, we've been running patrols for 3 months. We know the neighborhood. One of his squad leaders snickered. Another muttered something about PowerPoint Rangers, just loud enough to carry. Claire's expression didn't change. She'd heard all before, in different wars from different young men who couldn't imagine that the middle-aged woman with a laptop had ever been anything other than what they saw. I'm just highlighting the patterns, she said evenly. What you do with the information is your call. She answered their questions with the same flat professionalism, marking danger areas, noting where vehicles could get stuck in narrow alleys. A few soldiers stare at their phones. Webb checked his watch twice. Nobody noticed the small details that told a different story. The faint white scars across Claire's knuckles, the old unit patch barely visible on her backpack from a Bosnia rotation in the late 90s, the simple ring on her right hand engraved with a reconnaissance unit crest that hadn't existed in a decade. Claire had served in the army back when women weren't officially allowed in direct combat roles, but somehow ended up there anyway. Bosnia first, then Iraq in 2003 with a brigade reconnaissance unit that operated in the shadows. She'd been good, then exceptional, then quietly legendary among a small circle who knew what she could do with a rifle at distance. But the institution had ground her down eventually, the way it did to anyone who stayed too long. She'd left, burned out, and largely forgotten, her name buried in after-action reports that nobody read anymore. Now she was back as a contractor, GS-12 on the civil service scale, officially an intelligence advisor. The young soldiers saw an older woman who analyzed reports and made slides. They had no idea she'd spent more hours under fire than their entire platoon combined. After the briefing, Webb gathered his team. "All right, we're going with the original route. Don't let intel scare you into being cautious. We own these streets." Claire didn't argue. She just returned to her corner and updated her personal map with small, precise marks only she understood. The disrespect had built gradually over the weeks, the way these things always did. In the dining facility, Claire overheard herself referred to as Grandma with a clearance. The sergeant who said it was loud enough that he knew she could hear. She gave a small, tired smile and went back to her coffee. It wasn't worth the fight. At the range one afternoon, Claire had been present in a support role, officially there to collect data on Weapon Zero procedures. Lieutenant Webb showed off his new optic, struggling to get a consistent group at 300 meters. Several soldiers complained their rifles were off, blaming the weapons instead of their fundamentals. The range safety officer, a grizzled sergeant first class named Kowalski who'd been in the Army since the first Gulf War, glanced at Claire and quietly asked if she wanted to check one. She declined at first, trying to stay in her lane. But when another rifle mysteriously wouldn't group and the soldiers kept complaining, Kowalski insisted. "Ma'am, just make sure the rifle's good." Claire stepped up to the line, checked the sights with quick, practiced movements, and settled into a shooting position that was textbook perfect. She fired 5 rounds in smooth succession. The spotters called it a cluster you could cover with a quarter dead center at 300 meters. The younger troops attributed it to luck, to range magic, to anything except the obvious truth. Webb shrugged it off. "Nice shooting, ma'am, but the real test is when someone's shooting back." Back in the operations center, Claire noticed the last-minute route change that would take the patrol through that narrow alley network she'd flagged. She brought it up to Webb again, suggesting an alternate route or at least different overwatch positions. He waved her off. "Ma'am, we've got this. I don't need ghost stories from the last deployment. My guys know what they're doing." Then he'd given a speech to his platoon about not letting intel scare you into caution, and Claire had simply nodded and returned to her desk. On that desk, face down, was an old photograph of her in a ghillie suit somewhere in the Balkans, 2 decades younger and 1,000 years harder. Nobody had ever asked about it. She still flinched at the sound of helicopter rotors, a reflex she'd never quite shaken. Once, a Special Forces major passing through the JOC had stopped to greet her with genuine warmth. "Ma'am, good to see you again. You still keeping these young idiots alive?" The platoon had noticed, but misread it, assuming she just knew people the way any career bureaucrat might. The unfairness of it settled over Claire like an old coat. She understood why they underestimated her. She even understood the arrogance. She'd been young once too, bulletproof and stupid. But understanding didn't make it easier to watch them walk toward danger they couldn't see, dismissing the one person who actually understood the geometry of urban ambushes and the patience of enemy snipers. The day of the patrol, Claire watched their blue icon move across her digital map. She tracked them through the checkpoint, watched them push north into the dense warren of alleys that matched exactly the danger zones she'd highlighted. Her gut tightened. The older NCOs with the patrol would feel it too, that animal instinct that came from experience, but Webb would push them forward anyway, following his plan. The ambush unfolded exactly as she'd feared. A blocked route with a burned-out vehicle forcing them into a narrower alley. Then the IED blast, small but effective, channeling them into cover positions that put them in a perfect L-shaped kill zone. Coordinated small arms fire erupted from multiple elevated positions. The radio net lit up with chaos. Troops in contact. Troops in contact. We need air. We need QRF. The operations center snapped to life around her, officers and NCOs moving to their posts, but Claire was already in motion. She grabbed a rifle case from under her desk, an old bolt-action Remington 700 with a high-and-night force optic that technically belonged to a coalition marksman program. Sergeant First Class Kowalski, manning the arms room, saw her coming and simply unlocked the cage without a word. They'd had this conversation weeks ago, in quiet tones, about what she might need to do if things went bad. "You bring my rifle back, ma'am," he said. "Always do," she replied. Claire moved through the base with purpose, not running but not wasting time. She'd already scouted the overwatch position during her off hours, an abandoned building on the edge of the city with a clear view into the old quarter where the patrol was dying. The climb was brutal, her legs burning as she hauled herself and the rifle case up 4 flights of stairs and then onto the roof through a gap in the collapsed ceiling. On the ground, Webb's voice was breaking over the radio. "We're pinned down. We've got 2 wounded. We need immediate air support." "Air is delayed," came the calm response from the Tactical Operations Center. "Another engagement north of your position. We're trying to redirect." "We don't have time," Webb shouted. Someone was screaming in the background. "Intel screwed us. They walked us right into this." Claire tuned it out. She set up the rifle on a low wall, using her pack as a rest, and pulled out her range card. She'd studied this neighborhood from satellite imagery and previous reports. She knew the old sniper positions, the rat lines, the buildings with the best angles. Now, she had to find which ones the enemy was using today. She glassed the area methodically, breathing slowly, letting her heart rate settle. There, a glint off a rifle barrel. Second-story window, 700 meters, wind left to right about 5 miles per hour. She dialed her dope, made her wind call, and settled the crosshairs. The rifle barked. Through the scope, she saw the figure in the window drop. She shifted position slightly, already scanning for the next threat. Another shooter on a rooftop, this one closer, 600 meters. He was firing down into the platoon's position, oblivious to her. Claire adjusted, breathed, pressed the trigger. The shooter slumped forward. On the ground, Webb's soldiers were still fighting, still trying to return fire, but they were confused now. Their enemy was disappearing, dropping one by one from an angle they couldn't identify. Claire kept working, methodical and precise, eliminating threats in order of danger to the pinned platoon. A third shooter trying to flank. Down. A fourth reloading behind a wall. Down. She moved between shots, never staying in one position long enough to draw counterfire. It was muscle memory now, procedures learned 20 years ago and never forgotten. Range, wind, target, breath, press. The ambush fell apart. Without their overlapping fields of fire, without the coordination that had made them deadly, the remaining insurgents broke contact and melted back into the city. Webb's platoon bounded back, carrying their wounded, finally able to break free from the kill zone. Claire fired one last covering shot, then began breaking down her rifle with quick, efficient movements. By the time she made it back to the base, the platoon would be in the aid station, and nobody would ever know she'd left. But someone did know. Sergeant First Class Kowalski logged her rifle back in with a slight nod, and that was all that passed between them. The after-action review happened 2 days later, after the wounded had been stabilized and the platoon had gotten some sleep. They gathered in a cramped briefing room, exhausted and subdued. Webb and his squad leaders traded theories about who had saved them. Had to be special operations, one said. Saw the shot placement. Professional work. Maybe a sniper team from another unit, another suggested. Foreign partners? Then the battalion commander walked in, a full-bird colonel who'd been in the army longer than most of them had been alive. With him was an older Special Forces sergeant major with a chest full of decorations and eyes that had seen everything. The room snapped to attention. At ease, the colonel said, "Sit down. I want to talk about the Overwatch element that saved your asses 2 days ago." Webb leaned forward. "Sir, what unit was that? We'd like to thank them." The colonel's expression was unreadable. "Lieutenant, the Overwatch element was one person, and she's standing in the back of this room." Every head turned. Claire stood near the door with a folder tucked under her arm, her expression calm and unchanged. The room went completely silent. The sergeant major spoke next, his voice carrying the weight of decades. Some of you probably don't recognize this, but he pulled something from his pocket, a unit patch that matched the faded one on Claire's backpack. This was a reconnaissance task force that operated in Bosnia and early Iraq. Very low profile, very effective. And Red Halpern here was one of the best long-range shooters they ever had. Webb's face drained of color. His earlier comments about Auntie PowerPoint and ghost stories echoed in his own memory like accusations. The colonel gestured for Claire to step forward. She did, reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "Walk us through your decision-making, please." She spoke plainly, without pride or flourish. She explained how she'd seen their route change, how she'd recognized the kill zone geometry from previous engagements in that exact neighborhood, how she positioned herself where she could provide the most effective support. She gave credit to Sergeant First Class Kowalski for the rifle, to the Tactical Operations Center for managing the chaos, to the platoon's own actions under fire. When she finished, one of the wounded soldiers raised his hand. He was on crutches now, his leg wrapped in bandages. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "we heard those shots. We thought we were done. Thank you." The room was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. The arrogance had drained away, replaced by something harder to name. Shame, maybe. Respect, certainly. Webb looked at the floor, his jaw tight. "Red doesn't usually work Overwatch," the sergeant major continued. "She's officially here as an analyst. But when she saw you walking into that ambush, she made a command decision. And that decision is the only reason all of you made it back." After the meeting, the changes were subtle but unmistakable. Soldiers who used to walk past Claire's desk without acknowledgement now nodded respectfully. A chair was quietly left open for her at the next planning session, near the front instead of in the back. When she walked through the dining facility, conversations paused just long enough for people to murmur "ma'am." Lieutenant Webb found her in the operations center 3 days later. He brought 2 cups of coffee and set one on her desk. "Ma'am, I wanted to ask." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "How would you plan that route? What should I have done differently?" Claire looked up at him, saw genuine humility in his expression, and decided to give him the same thing she'd wished someone had given her when she was young and thought she was invincible. "Sit down," she said. "Let's walk through it." They spent an hour going over the map, talking about urban geometry and enemy patterns and how to read terrain with the eyes of someone who'd been ambushed before. Webb listened instead of talked. He took notes. He asked smart questions. When he left, he said, "Thank you, ma'am." "Really?" She just nodded. "Stay safe out there, LT." In every war, there are faces that never make it onto posters or into official histories. They work in corners and shadows, study the maps nobody else has time to read, remember the streets from old deployments, and take the shot when no one else can. They don't do it for recognition or medals or stories told around the fire. They do it because someone has to, because they're the ones who know how, because younger soldiers deserve to come home even if those soldiers never bother to learn their names. Claire returned to her usual corner in the operations center, her thermos within reach, her screens glowing with maps and reports. The next patrol would go out tomorrow, and she'd be there to brief them, to mark the danger zones, to offer advice that some would take and others would ignore. That was the job. That was always the job. But now, when she walked through the base, people saw her. And that was something.